And then I'm wondering, what came to mind when you were talking was Murdoch's quote about love is when you recognize something else is real. And I was wondering, right? And of course, right? And Eros shows up, of course, in bearing witness to Epiphany. And Eros is, all through it. It's a defining feature, if that's the right way of putting it, of Socrates, and the transformation of the notion of Eros in Plato's hands as he tries to figure Socrates for us. So what role does love play in that process you're talking about?
Yeah, another great question. The discussion of Eros in Plato has been, I think, the thing that I've been sort of trying to understand for myself. So I've written quite a bit about it. I've got lots of essays. It comes up in lots of books. There are lots of ways to translate Eros. You use the word love. You could also think of it as sexual desire, sexuality, something like that. And I think those things are all right. But often I like to think it's just the notion of passion, in the sense that when you have a real passion for something. I think that's if you think of what it's like to experience a passion for something, it's this overwhelming attraction to something, but it's not an attraction to it where you want to use it or take advantage of it, right? It's an attraction to it where you think it's great, like it's very much defined by it, sort of submitting yourself to its guidance in a way, right? To initiating yourself into its reality. It is also sort of fiery and all-consuming. The thing we commonly think about as sexuality, that's the sort of the place in our lives where maybe in the most sort of immediate and gripping way we experience that capacity to be passionate. Sexual energy is in a way what's fueling those passions. And so sexual energy, and I've really tried to think about that link a lot, about the idea that Eros, or sexuality at its basic level in human life, is a passion for others or for an other. If you have a passion about your passion, right? If you honestly explore what's going on in your sexuality, I think that that is a thing that develops, and it does develop into these other sorts of passions. It develops into a passionate embrace of the human world, and so Diotima says, you develop your Eros, you're going to care about virtue, you're going to care about politics, you're going to care about those. That's on the path. The healthy development of our sexuality will lead us into a passionate concern for those things. And also the sort of flip side of that, a good engagement with politics and the rest of that really requires that it be rooted in that kind of passion that starts in our erotic characters, that sort of lusty engagement with the human world. So, I kind of went off on a bit of a ramble there, but
no, it's
that's what I think of.
Well, so let's discuss this a little bit, because this is a really interesting point for me. So as a cognitive scientist, one of the things I do is, I study consciousness and cognition and transformations. And one of the things I've studied is when people have experiences that are sort of called higher states of consciousness. And typically what's really interesting about those is this weird reversal that happens for people. So they'll have this experience often ineffable to them, but the way they most reliably talk about it is as the really real.
Oh yeah, right.
Right, and then what you see is the Eros, and it's exactly what we're talking. There is this tremendous desire, this drive to conform. They will start to transform their structure of their psyche, their relationships, their careers, and if you study, the reason they're doing this, right, is because they say, well, I want to be more in touch with that. I want to live closer to that. So they engage in this tremendous process of transformation, and again, and of course, and then, right. What I'm trying to point at is, they might not call this metaphysical what they're doing, but they're invoking the really real, and they're invoking it. And what's like, and just think about what they're willing to do, John. Like, normally when we have these aberrant states, we say that wasn't real because it doesn't fit in with all of this. What they say is that was really real, and this is less real, and I have to like the arrow gets, and you see this tremendous and by objective measures, their lives do get better in many measurable ways, and I think that and the thing is, you know, this is hard to get totally accurate, but there's reasonable estimates that, you know, 20 to 40% of the population can have these experiences. And so it's often the case that these people struggle to find the language that they need to articulate both what they've experienced and the aspirational project that they've put themselves into. And so I think, for me, that's a way of disclosing, you know, the point we're talking about here. There are certain experiences in which, for a variety of reasons I won't go into, a lot of the other sort of salient concerns drop away, and this concern for what's really real becomes paramount, but not as an abstract idea, but as a passionate call, a vocation. And so I think that that's also very good evidence for the kind of thing we're talking about. And for me, that helps to also make sense to those aspects where Plato is describing this, like the anagoge out of the cave or the divided line, which get described as mystical, right? Because he's trying to articulate that, like, once you start making this journey and you start to get, as you said, an erotic attachment to these deeper aspects, it can sometimes draw you into some very profound transformative experiences.
Yeah.
So I want to bring up, this is flowing very beautiful, but I want to bring up a problem you pose. Now, forgive me, I've only started the book, all right? So there may be things you said later in the book, but this is just, but you bring up a problem, at least that's being posed in the Republic, and I think it's bang on. And you bring up the Greek word logos as this capacity for, taking into account, but giving account, responsiveness, responsibility, making sense. You use these terms interchangeably, and I totally agree with that. And then you bring up that there's an ambivalence, and Hyland does something somewhat similar in finitude and transcendence, but there's and Bellman also does this a little bit in the reflectiveness gap, but there's an ambivalence around the logos, because it is precisely our logos, our way of at least making sense, has some fundamentally different dimensions to it than what animals are capable of. Obviously, they're not completely unresponsive to their environment or anything like that, but there's as you rightly put out, we're in dimension, because we're cultural, there's dimensions of this that exceed what any animal is capable of. And then let's make it a little bit, sorry, this is going to turn out to be a little bit of irony. I'm going to be making it more concrete by talking about our powers of abstraction.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like, so the logos has this tremendous capacity to put us in touch with patterns, that are of a more abstract nature. Think about how, as you do in the book, how money is in one sense a very abstract kind of entity, things like that, and that terrifically empowers us to sort of be able to fit to the world, belong to the world that we're in. But at the same time, it also has the capacity to remove us, to take us from. And Bellman, for example, in his work talks about like Hamlet as the prototypical example of someone whose logos just abstracts him so much from the situation that his agency is dulled. People around him are going mad and dying, and he's in some sense even sort of indirectly causing that. And so I see you as really picking up on that tension around the logos, and I wanted to know what your thoughts are about that. Like I said, you probably address it in the book.
Yeah, that's the book.
Yeah. But it seems just apropos to bring it up right now where we are in the conversation, because we've been sort of talking about this and rightly so, the beauty of this, the depth, the eros, the attachment, the transformation. But there's also this problem, if I can put it. There's this tension, this issue that's also fundamental to the very structures by which we make sense. So I think we, in order to be responsible, should address the problematic aspect of this.
Yeah, that's great. When you're talking about logos, it seems to me there's a basic way that we to understand ourselves, we have to understand that we are that kind of being that goes around taking account of things.
Yes.
And
yes.
So on the one hand, that you could think of that as a power in the sense that we can take account of things. That's right. Yeah. But you could also think of it as a limitation in the sense that we can't not take account of things.
Yes. Yes.
So that's us. Like, we're doing that. We're figuring stuff out, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
But we can be better or worse at that.
Yes.
And so studying things like metaphysics and whatever else, or studying philosophy in general, if it's done well, should help us to take account better.
Yes.
And we are beings with logos, which means we are always running around taking account of things. And that means the way we live is based on the sense we kind of harvested from the world around us. And the fact is, we often can do a pretty poor job of that.
Yes.
And so we think what we're doing makes sense. We think this is the right way to respond to the situation. We think this is what's happening. And we can be wrong on every one of those accounts. We're unhappy because what we do and what we interact with is actually working one way, but we're understanding it a different
right.
results don't come out. So, just going back to the remarks about sex and Eros and romance, like, doesn't mean you should never hook up arbitrarily with someone on Tinder, but if you think that's the thing that's going to satisfy your intellect, you're going to be wrong. And people do make that mistake, and that doesn't happen to. I don't think that happens to a cow or a cat, because they're not the ones. They don't come with that demand to sort of make sense of their experience in the same way. Like, they have instincts. Their cows are going to know how to mate with cows and so on, but people have this thing where everything that's going to happen has to go through our little processing system, which is our logos. And if we don't handle it well, we tie ourselves up in knots. So we have the capacity to make sense of things, but it's also the curse to have to make sense of things.
Right.
And we're going to be stuck in our lives with having to live with our way of making sense of things. And if we're not very good at it, we're going to be designing poor and unhealthy lives for ourselves. So there's no way to fix that problem in the sense that that's just the human condition. But what that points to is the profound need for human beings to get good at taking account, get good at using their logos. That's what we live by.
Yes.
And
yes,
you're weak at living by your logos, you're going to have a crappy life. But that's why we need to study, So I think that gets to what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful. That's a beautiful apology in the ancient sense for philosophy, right?
Yeah.
At least in Hadot's sense of philosophy as a way of life, and not
exactly.
just the technicalities of argumentation.
This conversation has really, in this last point, especially as you were articulating it, has really brought us back to what all of that writing is about.
Well, this seems like a good place to bring it to a close. Then that's a very good, a very virtuous Platonic circle we've circumambulated. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you.